Welcome back to the ＳիվիլNet podcast. I'm joined today by human rights lawyer Sheila Paylan and fellow Montrealer, of course. Always good to have you here.
Thank you. Always good to come back.
So we actually have quite a bit to unpack here. So I actually want to start with one of the big cases where you have the ICC that actually has issued arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and Benny Gantz, so the Israeli prime minister and the now former defense minister. So this is actually a breakthrough case. Can you tell us a little bit about this, and then let's talk about how that's going to impact Armenia, what that means for other dictators like Ilham Aliyev and so on?
Sure. It's a really, really big deal, about as big as the arrest warrants against Putin. And, you know, what it shows is that we are really stepping up as an international community to say heads of state don't have immunity. And so the importance of this, because, you know, the Netanyahu arrest warrant took a while to be issued from the pretrial chamber. It was submitted in May. So it took a long time. It's probably the most controversial case at the ICC, I would have to say. I'm really glad with the result. It was a bit scary to be waiting this long for it. What it means for Armenia or any other, you know, relevant country is Ilham Aliyev is much, much less safe, or people like him, yeah. But, and I think something that most people missed also is yesterday the ICC prosecutor announced that he intends to issue or seek an arrest warrant against the leader of Myanmar for the deportation and persecution of the Rohingya people. So that case is really relevant. It's almost like that is the case that we rely on when we make the argument that what happened with the deportation of the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh falls under the ICC's jurisdiction. So we're getting closer and closer to there being almost like, why would you ignore our case, you know, if this is going in that direction? The main issue being they need Armenia to refer the case. You know, we would have to actually start the process, and that seems rather unlikely at the moment.
Yeah, I want to talk about that, especially the Prime Minister's comments last week in an interview that he gave on Armenian news channels. But before we do that, I am interested in seeing, I mean, because the whole thing, right, is that there's this idea that powerful countries can behave the way that they want and they'll get around with impunity, right? And the filing against Putin was already the first kind of crack in that perception, right? Where, you know, you have a nuclear superpower whose leader can now essentially just vacation in Pyongyang and pretty much, you know, or Tehran and nowhere else. So it's very interesting. And you can see the subsequent behavioral changes where he really doesn't travel much. And I don't know if you saw last week, it's still unclear if it was at our insistence or not, but the Eurasian Economic Union summit is not, it's supposed to be in Armenia because Armenia is the president of it this year. It's actually going to be held in Russia, which means that Putin doesn't need to actually come here, because if he were, we are signatories of the Rome Statute. So it put us in an awkward position, to say the least. So you're starting to see the cracks of that, but there still was this perception, and again, you can also see the reactions by the Western countries, the beacons of democracy and the upholders of the international rules-based order, who are up in arms about this, right? So France kind of implied recently that they would not arrest Netanyahu under certain circumstances. It's unclear what their position is. The United States is...
Which is a very different position that they took on Putin, so...
Yeah, and and of course.
Yeah.
You have the United States is threatening to sanction the ICC judges. Like, it's really weird what's going on. Can you unpack that a little bit? What that means? Like, because is the ICC vulnerable to this kind of international pressure?
Of course it is. Of course it is, which is why there are so many calls for you know, leaders like American presidents to stop saying things like that, or American leaders. But that's their position. They are not a party to the Rome Statute. They don't like the idea of international criminal law because it's not their ethos, yeah? And they have taken steps in the past when it came to Afghanistan. So it's not an empty threat, you know? There's not much we can do about it. What can I say? Like, the ICC was created by a community of states, and those states are, trying to run this international criminal justice show as best that they can. There are 120, now 5, with Ukraine having joined countries. That's like most of the world. It's most of the world. So there's a reputational hazard that comes with continuing to attack the independence of judges and the ICC and all that. And given, of course, the huge moral implication of saying, no, you can't pursue international criminal justice. Like, what are you talking about? Like, why are you being so crazy about it? Yeah. But at the same time, the prosecutor is really going for it. Like, this is an interesting push from the ICC's part to seek as many arrest warrants as they can. It's promising, and before Putin, there was a warrant against leaders of heads of states, but now we're really in the big leagues with people like Putin and Netanyahu, and Aliyev is not in that league. So not. It wouldn't be. Look, once the arrest warrant was issued, you can call it a correlation, but Israel announced a ceasefire. So these things do have effect, even if it doesn't land with someone in jail. They have that sort of deterrent effect, and we're just not getting enough of that for our troubles, and we have to resort to giving up a lot of things we shouldn't be giving up because of that.
Well, so let's shift gears actually and talk about this, because obviously these kinds of things are going to impact us. And so, as you mentioned, right, Aliyev he doesn't have a big red button that he can press. He's not a nuclear power. It's a third-rate gas station of a country run by an inbred family. I'm not mincing my words here, but these guys are nobodies. These guys, the second the gas dries up, they're going to be relegated to some backwater status like Tajikistan, that doesn't produce anything of value for the world. So that window is rapidly closing. So you can also see, a lot of Aliyev's comments very recently is basically indicative of what he's afraid of, right? So the preconditions for peace was this bullshit story about the Constitution, which everybody knows is just it's a joke. I say whatever the heck I want.
Love it.
But it's gotten to be like, it started off as this one condition, and then the two most recent ones, well, actually the 3 really, is that, and these have been confirmed last week, right? That the 3 most recent demands that Aliyev is piling on is, number 1, to put an end to Armenia's rearming and military reform. So that again, that tells you what he's afraid of at night is a resurgent Armenia that's able to actually defend itself. Second thing is he doesn't want the EU monitors on the border, which again, really interesting, because they're accusing us left and right of violating the ceasefires, and the EU's like, yeah, actually that's not happening. So they don't want EU monitors on the borders. And the third thing, which is really interesting, is that they're demanding the withdrawal of any cases to the ICC and the ICJ, right? So they want, and the Prime Minister alluded to this last week.
They're also demanding the change to the Constitution.
Yeah, that's what I said. That was the first one, but
the first one was armament.
No, the first one was the change to the Constitution, but that's been around for a few months. Like, it's obvious until they can come up with other stuff. This was like a placeholder, because it's just such a non-issue that, it's gotten to be a joke at this point, right? The next one is they're going to ask us to remove Ararat from the the Zina Nishan or something. They're going to keep finding this random stuff. But these 3 are very interesting: the armament, the EU monitors, and the ICC, which tells you that this is a legitimate threat to Aliyev. It's something he's genuinely concerned about. And so the Prime Minister in an interview last week said that should a peace agreement be reached, then they would mutually withdraw any cases that they have against each other. First of all, what do you think of this, of kind of bartering with justice?
I'm a hardcore justice person, so I would say that's non-negotiable, but really, politically speaking, it kind of makes sense. And it's just, it theoretically makes sense. You can't have peace without justice. You can also not really have justice without peace. So it's happened before. It wouldn't be the first time. It's not entirely unusual.
Like what example do you have?
There are many instances of, dropping arms comes with amnesty, and peace comes with agreement not to prosecute. This happened in Colombia with the FARC. It happened in South Africa for full confessions. People were, so it happens. But this situation is not like those. This one is, we've already started the cases. A lot of victims are depending on the outcome of these cases. And, you know, just fast forward, it's not going to change. This peace treaty is not going to change Azerbaijan's position against us. And we're going to lose something huge. We're going to lose the ability to actually get justice for the perception of peace in the very short term. So theoretically, it makes sense. Practically, it doesn't to me.
But do you think if we withdraw, it's like, is it possible to drop these cases and then refile them again later down the line? Let's say that they don't. Well, let's just say, for example, right, because the cases now that are being put ahead are not just for, first of all, the horrors they committed in Artsakh in 2020, which includes the executions in Hadrut, the multiple beheadings, all the stuff that they gladly shared on Instagram and TikTok. Then there's also the September attack, including the dismemberment of a mother, a female volunteer, and all the other stuff that they've done. And then now you have on top of that the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh. And let's say that they were to violate a supposed peace treaty and they were to attack and commit the atrocities that we know that they're capable of doing. Can these previous 3 things that have been filed be brought back up within the 4th filing? Or there's like a statute of limitations, or
No.
like you can't kind of keep...
It depends on the terms of the withdrawal. So, and you have to look at the court before, you know, the filing. We have nothing at the ICC, so that's always open. ICJ case, if you drop it, technically you can restart it unless there's some sort of, there's a term of art. You can drop it without prejudice or with prejudice. You can, it depends on how they actually drop the case. And even if you drop it without prejudice, where you say, okay, we might restart it, it's really hard to restart. We've pumped probably millions of dollars into this case already.
Oh, wow.
It's not... And
sorry, are these taxpayer funds, Sheila, or these
I don't know.
or these are like private legal funds?
It's just the government is paying for it. So
okay, so these are taxpayer funds. Well, then that makes it even worse, right? Is that you're literally squandering citizens' wealth.
I didn't say that.
Well, I will say that.
Okay, I didn't say that.
If that were the case, right? If the government's paying for this, then this is taxpayer funds. This is justice on behalf of taxpayers' family members. I understand that we're seeking peace at the barrel of a gun, but it's more painful if that's the case.
But we are winning, and if this, like I said, it's not entirely unusual for it, and it kind of makes sense in the long run. And don't forget, we have cases against us from Azerbaijan for all the damage that, you know, they're accusing us of having caused in environmental damage in Nagorno-Karabakh from all the mining and all that. Well, you know, that's also a big billions of dollars hanging over our heads. So I can see the rationale of saying we start from scratch, but that's if you're really serious about it. You know, what I wouldn't want to see, it's not about money being squandered, or it's about losing something that we are actually winning for the sake of something we're not going to get. It's just a piece of paper. 50% of peace treaties fail, peace agreements fail in the first 5 years. That is a statistic. So we have the odds against us already. They usually don't last if you don't have an international third-party guarantor or a peacekeeping force in place.
Like a mechanism.
That's even more unlikely to last. And then if it's an autocratic regime whose entire political identity depends on this war, and their power dynamic depends on their remaining at war, how do you expect the signing of a peace treaty to actually last, and then throwing away these cases that we are actually kind of winning? You know, that's what from a pragmatic point of view, I think it's a really bad idea. It's giving up a lot for something in the short term. There will be, you know, lots of press shaking hands. We have a peace treaty, and I would bet almost all my money that it'll be broken from their end, because they're already they're jailing their own people for being nice to us, you know. They don't have peace in their hearts. Not all Azerbaijanis, I'm talking about the leadership.
The state. Oh, that's obviously understandable, but the truth of the matter, that in a country like that, the people don't have you know, a whole lot of say in it. So when you are talking about Azerbaijan, you're only talking about the state apparatus. You're talking about the ruling family. Yeah.
Now, I can't see Armenia, you know, agreeing, or if they agree, okay, we won't launch a case against you at the ICC, or we won't refer the case to the ICC. But if they break the peace treaty, then that's off the table, and then we could go for it. You know, so I would see the next. And I always said, you know, because we hadn't ratified the ICC statute in time, we had to wait too long after September 2022 and the deportation and all that. Now we're ready. Now, it's just that filing now doesn't have the impetus. If we had filed, let's say, September last year, we had all the momentum, we had all the world's support, we had, well, most of it, yeah. We'd have to wait for another big moment, I think, to be able to get the kind of movement on getting the prosecutor to actually launch a case. And I wouldn't want it to have to come down to that.
Yeah.
So...
Can a third party file for us? So let's say, for example, Armenia says, you know, we're not going to do it. We can mutually withdraw, whatever. And then, I don't know, a country like France steps up and goes, actually, we're going to file.
But they won't do it if, you know, Armenia asks them not to, because it would impede the peace process.
Yeah.
So it would have to be more a situation that, like, Armenia is unable to do so and really needs it, and isn't asking for it not to happen. So of course they can. If they wanted to, they could. It doesn't have the gravitas. Actually, that's not true. I mean, it could if there was like a coalition of states.
Well, for Israel, right? It's South Africa that initiated the proceedings, if I'm not mistaken. It's not.
No, that's at the ICJ.
Ah.
Yeah, at the ICC it was the state of Palestine.
Oh, so it was Palestine itself that initiated.
Yes, and then a bunch of states tacked on. So the state of Palestine is recognized as a member state of the International Criminal Court, but it was unable to do so at the ICJ because it's not a UN member state. So South Africa did start it, and the same with Gambia did it against Myanmar. So Gambia started the case against me, because the Rohingya are not a state.
They're stateless people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's interesting parallels for Artsakh as well.
Yeah.
It's actually interesting that you mentioned that, because part of this arrest warrants have also been issued for Hamas leadership. And then you'll also have like the famous case of, you know, former Yugoslavia, where you had Radovan Karadzic, you had Slobodan Milosevic. So you had the actual state of Serbia, you had the separatist state within Bosnia, right, the Republika Srpska, and then you have, you know, Croat leaders. And so, you also had KLA, so Kosovar leaders who were tried for war crimes. So, you know, this also doesn't, as you mentioned, right, there are cases against us. This doesn't immunize our side either from these kinds of prosecutions. I mean, I don't have an answer here, right? It's like, it really does seem like barterized justice, or that the justice system will just go, okay, well, we're going to make it equal. We'll please both sides, and we'll just issue a bunch of arrest warrants on both ends here. I'm not so worried about, you know, leadership from the 2020 war. I'm thinking 1990s, right? So
I'm thinking, look, I want to really sympathize with the political leadership of Armenia, because I know that they feel like, what choice do we have? What choice do we have? I mean, I would say you do have a choice. You can just get real and realize that this isn't going to lead where you think it's going to lead. Can you imagine all the angry victims and citizens, how they would feel if they knew that they didn't have justice and they no longer had peace? Like, that it wouldn't last very long. But at the same time, what choice do we have? Like, we have to try, is I think the thought process. Now, if you know, since you said the first thing Azerbaijan is demanding that we stop arming ourselves, do you think the Armenian leadership would actually agree to that?
No, look,
is that even thinkable?
This is also why I think, you know, the prime minister can make all the statements that he wants. I think I'll judge him based on whatever is signed and what, you know, like when I see the EU patrols start packing up and leaving, then I'll start to criticize. Until then, it may, you know, again, I don't know. I'm not within the government, but I think also, like, a lot of our viewership and especially in the diaspora, like, they don't, you know, I grew up, I mean, we grew up in Montreal as well, right? But I grew up in Armenian school singing songs about, you know, we were singing Imkach Getashin, we were singing about Monte Melkonyan. So we you know, we were told this stuff here that like out there that Armenia has like the most powerful army in the Caucasus. And there's an interesting EVN report article by the Professor Netenyahu who was showing that actually, you know, by the 2016 war, our army was weaker than Tajikistan's army, and Tajikistan doesn't have an army.
You keep mentioning Tajikistan.
Because it's a joke of a country. Like it's literally like,
that.
oh, come on, man. They've had a single dictators for the last 30 years. But anyway, the point that I'm getting at is that but they don't have a functional army. Like it's literally a bodyguard for the dictator. So it's, you know, it's rife with corruption. Our level was lower than theirs. Like we had no military preparedness. So people here know that they had to send socks and clothes and basic items to their sons who were serving. But over, you know, around, on the other side, we're singing songs about how our army is the strongest without ever participating in it.
Yeah.
So there's this kind of perception where Pashinyan's this weak and defeated man, and the government is just signing away and giving away this and that and this and that, conceding, and there's no rationale to it. And the point is, like, yes, there are reforms going on. There's some very serious arms acquisitions, enough for Aliyev to feel threatened, which is very good news. That tells you it's going in the right direction. At least I hope so. But people don't realize how vulnerable we are. I would say we were until fairly recently. I think we're better prepared now. We can put up a bit of a fight, but we're still not ready to win. So if tomorrow there's a war, you mentioned, right, how are people going to feel if they have no justice and they have no peace? Great, but how are people going to feel when thousands of their sons are again being thrown under Turkish and Israeli drones?
Yeah.
So like people don't realize like this is literally negotiating at the barrel of a gun. So if these are all tactics to stall until we're ready, fantastic. If he signs something tomorrow that puts us in this position, then we'll do a podcast talking about how idiotic the leader of this country is.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sitting in these halls of power.
There's one way around it. If you mutually agree to drop the cases, I would highly recommend, and if we don't have some, you know, international component, which we probably won't, highly recommend that you somehow integrate into the peace agreement the creation of a commission, a joint commission to deal with the justice issue. Truth and reparations
like
commission.
South Africa, truth and reconciliation, you mean?
Yeah, like
reparations means we have to pay and they have to pay, right?
Well, it can cancel each other out.
Yeah.
You know, or some kind of truth and justice reconciliation commission, some kind of transitional justice committee, so that we can actually have a space for the victims to grieve, and from both sides, like to actually, this is a very necessary component for actual lasting peace. And that's why dropping the cases, you know, if it's because it's a contentious thing, right? It's a contentious way of, but for me, it's a peaceful resolution to a conflict. It's a peaceful way of resolving the conflict. So if then the conflict is resolved, you can theorize, well, we don't need these peaceful ways to do it anymore. No, actually, we've got a lot of angry victims who in, you know, 10 years will, even if the governments lay down their arms, you don't have peace. The people are not at peace.
Yeah.
People are still really angry and upset. So how do they actually live together? How do they actually get along?
Yeah.
So there are ways around it. You can actually integrate that into the treaty. I would be hopeful, but would still be surprised if they actually took that into consideration.
Well, yeah, I mean that implies a state that's I mean, you mentioned South Africa as an example, but I mean the white Afrikaners voluntarily surrendered the reins of the country under huge, tremendous international pressure. I mean, they were literally sanctioned and embargoed by Western countries who were their previous supporters, right? I don't see that kind of pressure on Baku. I don't see that kind of genuine, you know, even though it's begrudgingly, but a will to move forward where both sides can come together. It's just all these are cynical tools because at the end of the day, you have a dictatorship, as you mentioned.
But how many times do we see over and over again Azerbaijanis screaming and crying and complaining, and, you know, rightly so, about having been displaced for 30 years.
Sure.
Don't they want some justice as well? Don't they demand from their president to make sure that this peace treaty incorporates some kind of mechanism to ensure that they're, you know what I mean? Like,
it's hard to know. It's not a state that bows to public pressure, right? It's not a political system that cares about the voice of the I mean, again, right? Like you have, as you said, right? They're suing us for environmental devastation in Karabakh. You haven't seen environmental devastation. So you see the oil fields of the Caspian. Like
I would like to see our government say that we want that in the peace treaty, and I would like to see Aliyev say, no, we don't.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
That's what I mean.
That's a very fair point.
Yeah.
Listen, I hope it doesn't come to that. I hope a lot of this is just symbolic, buying time. Unfortunately, there's no way to know until the Prime Minister actually puts pen to paper and withdraws cases, in which case I would be very worried. Let's hope for the best. Sheila Paylan, thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks again for watching ՍիվիլՆեթ.